It was a crisp morning when Jonathan Walker arrived at the Grandview Hotel, a luxury establishment that prided itself on exceptional service and a discreet clientele. He was dressed casually, jeans, a simple shirt, and the red Maga hat perched atop his head. It was his signature look, the hat a symbol of his beliefs, and something he wore proudly, whether at work or during leisure. Jonathan had a history with this hotel. As the owner, he rarely needed to step through its front doors, but today he was here on business, quietly observing the operation under the guise of a regular guest. He liked to see how his staff interacted with ordinary customers, to ensure the service was up to the high standards he demanded. The lobby was bustling with guests, the hum of conversations and clinking glasses filling the air. Jonathan, unnoticed by most, walked toward the check-in desk where a young receptionist, Emma, was speaking with a couple. She didn't see him approach, her attention fully on the transaction. As Jonathan stood to the side, he overheard her making small talk. But there was something in her tone that gave him pause. She was being polite, but her smile seemed a little forced, almost as if she was hiding her true thoughts. When the couple finally departed, Emma turned to Jonathan, her face lighting up with that all-too-familiar customer service smile. "Good morning, sir. How can I assist you today?" she asked, looking up from her computer screen. Jonathan offered a polite nod, checking in. "I made a reservation under Walker." "Walker?" she repeated, her fingers already typing on the keyboard. "Ah, yes, Mr. Walker. Right this way, please." As she reached for the keys behind the desk, Jonathan noticed the glance she gave his hat, an almost imperceptible moment of hesitation. But it was enough for him to notice. He couldn't help but feel a slight tension in the air, though he brushed it off as paranoia. Unbeknownst to Emma, Jonathan was the one person who could change the course of the hotel's future, for better or worse. But today he was just another guest in her eyes as far as she knew. And with that, Jonathan followed her to the elevator, unaware that the day would take a very different turn than he had imagined. Jonathan settled into his room without incident, unpacking his belongings with the calm, methodical precision of someone who had done this 1,000 times. The suite was immaculate, the view overlooking the city skyline just as he remembered. It was the perfect place for a getaway, or at least, that was what he had planned. But the events that followed would ruin the peaceful day he had envisioned. It was around noon when he decided to grab a bite to eat in the hotel's restaurant. He slipped on his jacket and, of course, adjusted his signature red Maga hat. As he passed by the lobby, he could see Emma at the front desk, chatting with another staff member. Their conversation stopped abruptly when they noticed him. Jonathan thought nothing of it, and walked toward the restaurant without a second glance. The dining area was a mix of luxury and comfort, with soft lighting and modern furnishings. He was greeted by the host, who escorted him to a table near the window. Jonathan ordered a coffee and a light sandwich, opting for something simple. It wasn't long before the waiter returned with his order. However, as Jonathan began eating, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. He glanced around the room and saw several of the hotel staff lingering nearby, their conversations hushed whenever their eyes met his. The sense of unease only grew stronger. Moments later, a manager named Richard approached his table. Richard was a tall, well-groomed man with an air of authority. He smiled politely, though there was a hint of discomfort in his eyes. "Excuse me, sir," Richard said, his tone measured but firm. "We have a hotel policy regarding attire. The hat you're wearing doesn't align with our dress code." Jonathan paused, setting his sandwich down. "What's wrong with my hat?" he asked, already sensing the tension in the air. It's just not something we allow here," Richard stammered, clearly uncomfortable. "We strive for an environment that reflects the values of this establishment, and unfortunately, that symbol doesn't fit within our guidelines." Jonathan raised an eyebrow. "Are you telling me that I need to take my hat off?" Richard hesitated before nodding. "Yes, sir. It's for the comfort of all guests." Jonathan couldn't believe what he was hearing. He had been to countless upscale establishments before, some with far stricter policies, but never had he been asked to remove his personal choice of clothing in such a blatant, dismissive manner. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Jonathan asked, his voice now laced with a slight edge. "You do realize who I am, right?" Richard blinked, taken aback. "I'm sorry, sir. But I'm afraid the policy stands. I'll have to ask you to leave if you refuse to comply." Jonathan stared at him for a moment, his mind racing. The realization hit him like a wave. They didn't know who he was. None of them did. He stood up, his chair scraping the floor with a sharp sound that echoed across the room. Richard seemed to flinch but held his ground. "I'll leave," Jonathan said, his voice calm but tinged with frustration. "But you'll regret this." He left the restaurant without another word, the eyes of the staff burning into his back as he walked out. Jonathan stormed back to the elevator, his mind racing. The more he thought about it, the angrier he became. He had built this hotel from the ground up. Every brick, every beam, he had overseen it all. And now this, being told to leave his own property over a hat. He reached his suite, slamming the door behind him as he entered. He paced around the room, frustration bubbling to the surface. It wasn't just the hat. It was the audacity of the staff to question his presence. He had been a guest many times before, but now, he realized, he had become a target for something beyond the hotel's policies. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Jonathan froze, his heart skipping a beat. Had they come to apologize, or were they here to reinforce their ridiculous demand? He opened the door, and standing there was Emma, the receptionist from earlier. Her smile was gone, replaced by an apologetic look. "Mr. Walker, I'm so sorry about what happened earlier," she said, her voice soft and hesitant. "There was a misunderstanding, and we're hoping to resolve it." "Richard didn't mean to offend you." Jonathan crossed his arms over his chest. "Is that so?" "Because it didn't feel like a misunderstanding. It felt like you were all too eager to make me feel unwelcome." Emma looked down, avoiding his gaze. "I truly didn't mean for it to come across that way. It's just, we have a very specific dress code here. And, well, sometimes things get misinterpreted. We didn't realize who you were." Jonathan's expression hardened. "Of course you didn't. None of you did. None of you did. You just saw a man with a red hat and decided I didn't belong here." There was a long silence between them. Emma bit her lip, clearly struggling to find the right words. Finally, she spoke up again. "We understand how this must look," she said quietly. "If you'd like, we can offer you a complimentary dinner, a spa treatment, or anything else you might want as a gesture of goodwill. We don't want to lose your business, Mr. Walker." Jonathan could feel his anger starting to dissipate, but the humiliation remained. "I don't need your spa treatment," he replied sharply. "I don't need your fake gestures. What I need is for you and your team to understand one simple thing. I'm not just another guest here." Emma's eyes widened slightly. She seemed to realize the gravity of her mistake, but the weight of her words hadn't fully sunk in yet. "I understand," she said quietly, "but I think it's best if we let this go and start over, okay?" Jonathan looked at her for a moment, then turned and walked back into his suite without saying another word. He didn't want an apology or compensation. He wanted respect, the kind that he had earned through years of hard work. And that was something Emma and her team clearly hadn't understood. As the door clicked shut behind him, Jonathan took a deep breath and began to think about what to do next. He couldn't let this go. Not yet. He needed to show them that he wouldn't stand for disrespect. But he also needed to be strategic. This was his hotel, after all. The next few days were a blur for Jonathan. He spent the morning handling business matters from his suite, then took a stroll through the hotel, watching the staff as they went about their routines. Emma was still there, but she seemed to avoid him now, giving him nervous glances whenever she passed by. Jonathan had already begun his plan of action, but he wanted to gather more information first. He needed to know exactly who was behind the incident and how far the disrespect ran within his own establishment. He had to be sure that it wasn't just a case of an isolated mistake. He began by asking around, speaking with some of the staff members who had been working during the confrontation. He spoke to Richard, the manager who had kicked him out, and to a few other employees, casually asking about their opinions on the hotel's policies. What he discovered made his blood boil. It turned out that Richard had been influenced by some of the younger employees, who had made it clear that the Maga hat was a political statement they weren't comfortable with. They'd been vocal about it in the staff room, joking about how the hotel's high-end clientele would be appalled by such low-class behavior. The younger employees were vocal in their opinions, with some even suggesting the hotel should do more to police guests' appearance to avoid offending other customers. Jonathan couldn't believe what he was hearing. The hotel was supposed to be a neutral space, one that catered to all walks of life, regardless of their politics or beliefs. But what he was uncovering was a culture of intolerance, disguised as sophistication. The more Jonathan spoke to the staff, the more he realized that Emma and Richard were only following what had become an unspoken rule in the hotel. That certain guests, especially those with outwardly political affiliations, simply didn't belong. Jonathan knew what needed to be done. He wasn't the type to let personal slights slide, especially when they undermined his values and the foundation of his business. His hotel had been built on respect and inclusivity, yet here it was, his own employees, enforcing policies and attitudes that contradicted everything he stood for. His first move was to make sure he had the full support of his senior staff, those who had been with him from the beginning, before the hotel became just another corporate luxury chain. He reached out to his head of operations, Kevin, a loyal employee who had been with Jonathan through thick and thin. "Kevin, we need to talk," Jonathan said when Kevin answered his call. "Of course, Mr. Walker. What's going on?" "I've got a problem with the staff. Specifically with the way they handled the situation this week. It's about the incident in the restaurant," Jonathan explained, his voice calm but firm. Kevin was silent for a moment. "I know what you're talking about. It's been buzzing around the hotel. People are talking about it." Jonathan's frustration bubbled to the surface again. "This is exactly what I feared. The hotel's culture is starting to shift, and it's not for the better." Kevin agreed. "What do you want me to do?" Jonathan took a deep breath. "I need you to organize a staff meeting, a real one. I want to hear from everyone, whether they agree with me or not, but make sure we clear the air about the hotel's values. It's time we remind everyone about the respect we owe to our guests. All guests." Kevin didn't hesitate. "Got it. I'll get it arranged." As Kevin set the wheels in motion, Jonathan took a step back. He needed a plan, a way to take control of the situation without seeming like he was just throwing his weight around. He couldn't afford to alienate the staff entirely, but he also needed to make it clear that his authority was not to be questioned. The meeting would be pivotal, but Jonathan wanted to make sure it wasn't just a lecture. He wanted the staff to understand why their actions had consequences and how the atmosphere they created could impact the future of the business. But Jonathan knew that the real test would come after the meeting. Would the staff listen? Would they change their behavior? And most importantly, could he trust them to carry out his vision moving forward? The day of the staff meeting arrived, and Jonathan stood at the front of the hotel's conference room, watching as his employees filed in, one by one. Richard was present, though he looked uneasy. Emma, too, entered with her head down, avoiding eye contact with Jonathan. She still hadn't apologized, but Jonathan wasn't sure if that was what he wanted anyway. Kevin stood beside Jonathan, looking out at the room filled with nervous employees. "All right, everyone, let's take a seat. This isn't going to be a usual meeting," Kevin announced. Jonathan cleared his throat, addressing the room. "I'm not here to lecture you, and I'm not here to make anyone feel uncomfortable. But there are a few things that need to be said, and it's important we all understand the gravity of the situation." He paused, watching the room. Everyone was paying attention now. Even Richard seemed to have straightened up a little. "I own this hotel. I built it with my own hands, with a vision of creating a place where people from all walks of life can feel welcome. That includes you, your co-workers, and, most importantly, our guests. It doesn't matter who they are, what they believe, or what they wear. This hotel is meant to be a neutral space, a place of inclusivity and respect." Jonathan glanced over at Richard and Emma. "When I walked into this hotel last week, I was not treated with respect. I was told I didn't belong because of my hat, and it wasn't just about the hat. It was about the assumptions you all made about me based on something as trivial as my attire." There was a long silence as the weight of his words sank in. "I'm here today not to fight with you," Jonathan continued, "but to make sure this doesn't happen again. If we continue down this path of exclusion and division, we're going to lose everything we've worked so hard for. And I won't let that happen." Emma finally spoke up, her voice trembling. "Mr. Walker, I'm truly sorry. I didn't realize the impact of what we were doing. It was never my intention to make you feel unwelcome. Jonathan nodded. I appreciate that, Emma, but this is bigger than just one incident. This is about setting the tone for everyone who walks through our doors, regardless of who they are or what they wear. Richard, who had been quiet until now, cleared his throat. We understand, Mr. Walker. This will not happen again. Jonathan gave a small smile, feeling a slight sense of relief. Good. Because I'm not in the business of alienating people. I'm in the business of hospitality, and that means respecting everyone, no matter their background or beliefs. The meeting ended on a positive note, with Jonathan feeling that he had gotten through to his team. But the question lingered in his mind: could they truly change, or would they fall back into old habits, repeating the same mistakes? In the days that followed the meeting, Jonathan kept a close eye on the hotel's operations. He observed the staff's interactions with guests more closely, hoping to see a shift in behavior. The atmosphere at the hotel felt a little lighter, but there was still an undercurrent of tension. Some employees had taken the message to heart, but others seemed to be going through the motions, unsure of how to adjust to the new expectations. Jonathan knew that change wouldn't happen overnight. It would take time for the staff to fully embrace the values he had outlined. However, he couldn't afford to wait for gradual progress. He needed the hotel to function seamlessly, and he couldn't have any more incidents that could jeopardize the reputation he had worked so hard to build. A week after the meeting, he decided to take further action. He called for another staff meeting, this time to discuss a new initiative: customer service training. While the hotel's service had always been top-notch, Jonathan realized that the issue wasn't just about attire. It was about the mindset of the staff. He wanted to ensure that all employees understood the importance of hospitality, inclusivity, and respect in every interaction. The training wouldn't just be about following rules. It would be about cultivating empathy and understanding, about making sure that everyone, no matter their background or political beliefs, felt welcomed and valued. Jonathan was careful not to make the training feel like another lecture. Instead, he brought in an expert to lead the session, a renowned consultant who specialized in hospitality and diversity training. The consultant, Janet, was a woman with years of experience in the industry, and she quickly established credibility with the staff. She began by asking the group what hospitality meant to them and how they could make guests feel comfortable, regardless of their differences. As the training progressed, Jonathan noticed a change in the atmosphere. Staff members were engaged, asking questions, sharing their experiences, and learning how to navigate difficult situations with grace and professionalism. They discussed how to handle guests who might have controversial beliefs or who might wear something that could potentially cause discomfort among other guests. The emphasis was on understanding, not judgment, and finding common ground in every interaction. By the end of the session, Jonathan felt a sense of pride. The staff had been receptive, and he saw a genuine willingness to improve. The hotel was on the right track, but there was still more work to be done. The true test came a few weeks later, when a high-profile guest booked a stay at the hotel. A politician known for his strong views and controversial statements. His arrival was expected to stir some controversy among the staff, but Jonathan was determined to see how they would handle the situation. The guest, Senator Davis, arrived in the early afternoon, his entourage in tow. He was known for his fiery rhetoric and outspoken political opinions, and Jonathan was sure that the staff had heard of him. He watched as the front desk staff, led by Emma, checked him in. "Good afternoon, Senator Davis," Emma greeted him with a professional smile. "Welcome to the Walker Hotel. We're honored to have you with us." The senator barely acknowledged her, his eyes scanning the lobby. "Just make sure my room is to my liking." "I expect the best." Jonathan observed the exchange from a distance. He was curious to see how the staff would respond to any potential issues that might arise. He had no illusions that this would be a smooth encounter. Senator Davis was known for his abrasive behavior, but what mattered most was whether the staff could remain calm, respectful, and professional, no matter what happened. As the day went on, Jonathan continued to monitor the situation. The senator had a few requests, some of them unusual, others downright difficult to fulfill. But the staff handled them all with poise. Emma, in particular, showed an admirable amount of patience when the senator demanded a specific type of wine, only to change his mind moments later. She apologized politely, adjusted the order, and never once let her irritation show. That evening, Jonathan decided to visit the restaurant. He had heard that the senator had made some comments to the waitstaff, but no one had complained. As Jonathan sat at a nearby table, he overheard snippets of conversation. "I heard he called that waiter an idiot," one employee whispered. "Yeah, but did you see how calm she stayed? Didn't flinch once," another replied. Jonathan smiled to himself. This was exactly what he had hoped for. The staff wasn't reacting to the senator's behavior with judgment or anger. They were doing their job, staying professional, and focusing on providing excellent service. Later that evening, as the senator left the restaurant, he stopped at the front desk to speak with Emma. "Your staff is competent," he said curtly, "but I expect a higher standard of service next time. Make sure they know who they're dealing with." Emma nodded, keeping her composure. "Thank you, Senator. We'll ensure your next visit meets your expectations." Jonathan watched from a distance, feeling a sense of pride swell within him. The staff had passed the test. They had remained calm, professional, and respectful, even when faced with a challenging guest. That night, as Jonathan sat in his suite, he reflected on everything that had transpired over the past few weeks. The confrontation with his staff, the changes they had made, and the test of handling a difficult guest. It all seemed like a turning point for the hotel. Jonathan had learned a valuable lesson throughout this process. While it was important to uphold the values he believed in, it was equally important to give people the chance to grow, to learn from their mistakes, and to improve. His staff had done just that, and he was proud of them for it, but there was still much work to be done. Hospitality was an ongoing process, one that required constant vigilance and adaptation. Jonathan knew that the hotel would continue to face challenges, but he was confident that the team he had worked so hard to build was ready to meet them. As he lay down to sleep that night, Jonathan felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The hotel was in good hands, and he had made the right decision in confronting the issue head-on. The future looked brighter now. His vision of inclusivity, respect, and excellence would continue to guide the hotel for years to come. Jonathan woke up to a bright morning, the sun pouring through his hotel suite's floor-to-ceiling windows. He felt a sense of relief after the events of the past few weeks. The training session, the senator's visit, and the actions that followed, it had all contributed to a subtle but significant shift in the hotel's atmosphere. It felt lighter, as though the air itself was fresher. He could almost sense the staff's renewed commitment to the core values of the business. After his morning coffee, Jonathan decided to visit the front desk. He had been so focused on the broader issues lately that he hadn't paid much attention to the smaller, everyday moments that truly defined the hotel's success. As he entered the lobby, he was greeted with a warm smile from Claire, a relatively new employee who had joined the front desk team just a few months ago. "Good morning, Mr. Walker," she said, her tone cheerful yet professional. "Good morning, Claire. How are things going?" Jonathan asked, leaning against the desk casually. "Everything's going smoothly today. The guests are in good spirits, and the check-ins are running on time," she replied. Jonathan nodded. "That's what I like to hear. But I wanted to ask you something. Have you noticed any changes in the staff recently? How do you feel the atmosphere is in the hotel now?" Claire seemed to think for a moment before answering. "Honestly, it's different. The staff feels more connected. People are taking extra care with their work, and I think we're all just more aware of how important it is to make everyone feel welcome." Jonathan smiled, a sense of pride swelling within him. He had worked hard to foster a culture of respect, and it was beginning to pay off. The change wasn't instantaneous, but it was palpable. The staff's focus on hospitality was stronger than ever before, and Jonathan felt confident that this new approach would resonate with guests. "That's good to hear," Jonathan said, his voice filled with gratitude. "Keep up the great work, Claire." As he made his way to the restaurant for breakfast, Jonathan couldn't help but reflect on how far the hotel had come. Just a few weeks ago, it felt like everything was on the verge of falling apart. But now, the hotel seemed to be on a path to something greater. His staff had come together, and the hotel was once again a place where people could escape from the world's troubles and feel like they belonged. Later that afternoon, Jonathan was sitting in his office when he received a phone call from an unexpected source. "Emma, den, day, Right, glasses. All fears and assertions, all says. Right, I was the enemies. Wow. She had been one of the employees directly involved in the incident with the Maga hat, and Jonathan had seen her grow significantly since their conversation during the staff meeting. "Hello, Mr. Walker," Emma said hesitantly. "Hello, Mr. Walker," Emma said hesitantly. "I just wanted to check in and thank you again for the meeting. I know it wasn't easy, but it really helped me understand the bigger picture. I've been thinking a lot about what happened, and I feel like I need to take more responsibility for my actions." Jonathan leaned back in his chair, surprised by her honesty. "Emma, I appreciate you reaching out. It's not easy to admit when we've made mistakes, but it's a sign of growth. What are you thinking about doing?" "I've been considering how I can make things right with the guests I interacted with during that incident. I don't know if it'll fix things, but I want to reach out and apologize. I want to show them that we're committed to being a welcoming place for everyone." Jonathan was impressed by her initiative. "I think that's a great idea. Taking responsibility and showing genuine concern for our guests is exactly the kind of leadership we need. If you need any help or guidance, feel free to ask." After the call ended, Jonathan felt a sense of fulfillment. Emma's willingness to reflect on her actions and take responsibility was a sign that the hotel's new culture was beginning to take hold. It wasn't just about training or policies. It was about the staff genuinely understanding and internalizing the values of hospitality and inclusivity. But Jonathan knew that there would be more challenges ahead. Running a hotel was never a smooth journey, and there would always be bumps along the way. However, with a staff that was now united in purpose, he was confident that they would overcome any obstacle that came their way. It had been a few months since the training session, and Jonathan had settled into a routine. The hotel was running smoothly, and the staff had fully embraced the changes he'd set in motion. There had been occasional challenges, but they were met with maturity and professionalism. The guests, too, seemed more relaxed, as if they could feel the shift in the air. The hotel was a place where they could escape from judgment, a place where they could be themselves. But Jonathan knew that nothing stayed perfect for long, especially in an industry as unpredictable as hospitality. And it was about to be tested in a way he hadn't expected. It started with a call from the front desk late one evening. "Mr. Walker, we have an issue," Claire said on the other end of the line. "A guest just checked in and he's wearing a Maga hat. He's been causing some tension among the staff." Jonathan sighed, rubbing his temples. He had been hoping that they wouldn't have another incident like the one that had started it all. "What's going on exactly?" He hasn't said anything controversial yet, but the other guests in the lobby have been giving him strange looks. And, frankly, some of the staff are uncomfortable. They're unsure how to proceed. Jonathan thought for a moment. He had to be careful. This wasn't just any guest. It was a test of everything they had worked for. Would they hold firm to the values of respect and inclusivity, or would they slip back into old habits? "Don't worry, Claire. I'll handle it," Jonathan said. "I'll be down there in a few minutes." As Jonathan walked to the lobby, he could feel the tension building. He had no idea what to expect, but he knew that how he handled this situation would speak volumes. It wasn't just about one guest. It was about the reputation of the hotel and the values they had worked so hard to instill. When he reached the lobby, Jonathan saw the guest immediately. He was sitting in a corner chair, sipping on a drink, his red Maga hat perched firmly on his head. Jonathan noticed that there was a small group of staff members standing near the front desk, whispering among themselves. It was clear that they were uneasy. Jonathan walked up to the guest, who looked up at him with a slight smirk. "Mr. Walker, I presume," he said, his tone patronizing. "That's right. And you are?" "Ralph Richardson." "I'm here on business," the guest replied, eyeing Jonathan with a mix of curiosity and disdain. "I must say, your hotel's staff seems a bit too sensitive for my taste." Jonathan felt a surge of calm wash over him. This was a moment of truth. He had to stay grounded and handle it with grace. "I assure you, Mr. Richardson, we value the comfort and well-being of all our guests. If you have any concerns or if there's anything we can do to make your stay more enjoyable, please don't hesitate to let us know," Jonathan said with a genuine smile. But I do want to make it clear that our hotel is committed to inclusivity. We expect all our guests and staff to treat each other with respect. Ralph raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. Inclusivity, huh? I'm not sure your staff can handle a little diversity of opinion. Jonathan took a deep breath. Our staff is trained to handle all kinds of guests, Mr. Richardson. We've taken steps to ensure that everyone, regardless of their beliefs, is treated with respect. But that respect is a two-way street. I ask that you respect our staff and fellow guests, just as we respect you. Ralph leaned back in his chair, clearly sizing Jonathan up. After a long pause, he finally spoke. I'll respect anyone who respects me, but if anyone gives me trouble, they'll hear about it. Jonathan nodded. Understood. I'll make sure everyone is aware of your expectations, but I trust you'll do the same. As he turned to leave, Jonathan glanced at Claire, who was standing nearby. He could see the tension in her shoulders, but she didn't flinch. She gave him a small nod of approval, silently signaling that they were all on the same page. Later that evening, Jonathan couldn't shake the conversation with Ralph. He knew that the situation hadn't been resolved entirely. It was still a delicate balance. Ralph hadn't caused a scene, but there was an underlying tension that lingered. That night, as Jonathan sat at his desk going over reports, his phone rang again. This time, it was Emma. Mr. Walker, I think we need to talk, she said. Of course. Emma, what's on your mind? I've been thinking about today, she began, her voice filled with uncertainty. I'm not sure how to handle this. We've made a lot of progress, but this situation with Ralph, I'm worried it's going to set us back. Jonathan paused, leaning forward. I understand your concerns, but remember, we can't control everyone's actions. We can only control how we respond. It's about maintaining our values, no matter the circumstances. I know, Emma said, but I feel like we've come so far. I don't want to go backwards. I want to make sure we're always doing the right thing. Jonathan could hear the conviction in her voice. You are doing the right thing. Every day, you and the staff are embodying the values we've put in place. It's not about being perfect. It's about being consistent and doing the best we can in each moment. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and then Emma spoke again, her voice softer. I just needed to hear that. Thank you. Jonathan smiled, feeling a deep sense of pride. The change was no longer just about policies or rules. It was about the people who had embraced those values and made them a part of their daily lives. Emma, Claire, and the rest of the staff had come so far, and Jonathan knew they were ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The following morning, Jonathan couldn't shake the events of the previous day. His interaction with Ralph had left him uneasy, but he knew the importance of upholding the values they had worked so hard to establish. He wasn't going to let one guest, no matter how challenging, set back all the progress the hotel had made. It was an unspoken truth in the hospitality industry. No matter how prepared you are, there would always be unpredictable moments. Guests, like people, came with their own personalities, histories, and expectations, and sometimes that led to conflicts. But what mattered was how you handled them, how you turned tension into an opportunity for growth. Jonathan decided to take a proactive approach. Rather than wait for another incident or an escalation, he scheduled a meeting with the staff. He wanted to gauge how they were feeling, especially in light of the discomfort some had expressed about Ralph's visit. The meeting room was filled with familiar faces: Claire, Emma, some of the senior staff, and a few members of the housekeeping team. Jonathan stood at the front of the room, looking over each of them as he prepared to speak. I know we've all been working hard to make the hotel a welcoming space for everyone, Jonathan began. But I also know that there's been some discomfort lately. We've had some difficult situations, and I want to hear from you. How are you feeling? There was a brief silence before Emma spoke up. It's been tough. I think we've all been doing our best, but the situation with Ralph, it's made a lot of us question if we're doing enough. It's hard to keep the peace when guests bring their politics into the hotel. Jonathan nodded. I understand. It's a difficult line to walk. But let me remind you of something. We don't have to agree with every guest's viewpoint. We don't have to support every belief. But what we do need to do is make sure they feel heard and respected. We are in the hospitality business. That means we put people first, no matter where they come from or what they believe. The room was quiet as everyone absorbed Jonathan's words. He could tell they were all reflecting on the challenges they had faced. Ralph's visit isn't the end of the world. We've handled it and will continue to handle situations like it, Jonathan continued. But it's important to remember why we do what we do. We are here to create a safe, welcoming space for everyone. That doesn't change no matter the circumstances. Claire spoke up, her voice steady but filled with emotion. I think we've all been afraid of confrontation. We didn't want to rock the boat. But Jonathan, you've shown us that it's okay to stand up for our values. And I think that's what we need to do moving forward. We need to be proud of the culture we're building here, even when it's uncomfortable. Jonathan smiled at her. Exactly. It's not about avoiding conflict. It's about handling it with grace and integrity. We need to be proud of who we are as a team, and as a hotel. We can't let fear of disagreement silence our values. The meeting went on for another hour, with staff members offering their thoughts, concerns, and suggestions. It was one of the most productive discussions Jonathan had ever been a part of. For the first time in months, he felt a sense of unity in the room. The staff wasn't just following instructions. They were embracing the mission of the hotel and making it their own. Later that afternoon, Jonathan received a call from the front desk that made his stomach drop. Ralph Richardson, the same guest who had caused so much tension, was requesting to speak with the manager. Jonathan's first instinct was to prepare for another confrontation, but he took a deep breath, reminding himself of the work they had just done as a team. Jonathan went down to the lobby, where Ralph was sitting in one of the armchairs, looking irritated but calm. As Jonathan approached, Ralph looked up and motioned for him to sit. Mr. Walker, I have to admit I've been thinking a lot about our conversation yesterday, Ralph began, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. I realize now that maybe I came on too strong. I've been, well, a little defensive lately. You're right, this isn't the place for politics. I've been trying to separate myself from the kind of people who push their views onto others, and I guess I let it get the better of me. Jonathan was taken aback. This wasn't what he had expected, not by a long shot. He had prepared himself for more resistance, but Ralph seemed genuinely remorseful. I appreciate your honesty, Ralph, Jonathan replied, keeping his tone even. I know we all get caught up in our own opinions sometimes, but the important thing is how we move forward. I'm glad to hear you're willing to approach this with a new perspective. Ralph gave a small nod. I don't want to be that guy, the one who stirs up trouble just to make a point. I've seen how your staff handles things with class, and I respect that. I think I could stand to learn a thing or two from all of you. Jonathan smiled, his faith in the situation being restored. It's about respect, Ralph. That's what we're all trying to practice here. And I'm glad you're on board. With that, Ralph stood and extended his hand. Jonathan shook it, and they exchanged a brief but meaningful glance. The tension that had hung in the air for the past few days had finally dissipated. The hotel had weathered the storm and emerged stronger for it. As the weeks went by, Jonathan continued to monitor the staff's progress closely. The hotel was thriving, and more importantly, the atmosphere had transformed into something truly special. The team had learned to navigate difficult conversations with grace, and they were no longer afraid of conflict. Instead, they saw it as an opportunity to reinforce their commitment to inclusivity and respect. One afternoon, Jonathan received a letter from Ralph Richardson. It was an unexpected gesture, one that Jonathan hadn't anticipated, and it read, Dear Jonathan, want to thank you and your team for your hospitality during my stay. I came to your hotel expecting a typical experience, but what I got was something far more valuable, a lesson in respect and humility. I've been a difficult guest, but I've learned a lot from this experience. You have my sincere appreciation. Thank you. Ralph Richardson, Jonathan smiled, as he finished reading the letter. It was a simple note, but it carried with it a deep sense of growth. The hotel had done more than just provide comfort and service. It had made a lasting impact on someone, changing their perspective and opening their eyes to the power of empathy and respect. The hotel wasn't just a business. It was a community. And Jonathan had helped foster that sense of belonging. turning what had once been a difficult situation into an opportunity for everyone involved. As he sat in his office that afternoon, Jonathan couldn't help but feel a deep sense of satisfaction. The hotel had survived its toughest test yet, and the changes they had made were beginning to pay off in ways he had never imagined. Jonathan's reflection on the hotel's transformation continued as he noticed a subtle but profound shift in the interactions with the guests. There was a stronger sense of community in the air, one that he had only dreamed about when he first started this venture. The staff's ability to maintain a calm, collected demeanor in even the most heated situations had become a point of pride for everyone. Guests commented on the professionalism they saw, how the hotel was able to balance personal values and business needs. The customers felt like they were entering a space that embraced their differences, making them feel comfortable and welcome. As the days passed, Jonathan saw more of the ripple effects of this change. Local businesses began to take notice of how the hotel was evolving, and, in turn, more and more of them wanted to partner with Jonathan's team. Cafes, event venues, and art galleries started sending over promotional flyers, eager to collaborate. The hotel became the centerpiece of a revitalized local community, a place where people didn't just sleep, but gathered, exchanged ideas, and helped one another grow. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Jonathan walked out into the hotel's garden courtyard, a space he'd designed with quiet reflection in mind. He watched as a group of local artists gathered under the evening sky, discussing a new mural for the town hall. Nearby, a couple of international tourists laughed and shared stories about their travels while sipping cocktails. The warmth of human connection enveloped him, and for the first time, Jonathan allowed himself to fully appreciate the journey that had led him here. The hotel had become more than just a business. It had turned into a space where ideas could collide, grow, and be nurtured. In his efforts to create a welcoming space, Jonathan had not only built a hotel, but a community. And it wasn't just the staff and guests who were benefiting. Jonathan himself had learned to embrace change and confront his own beliefs. Despite the recent success, Jonathan knew the road ahead would not always be smooth. The hotel's growth had invited increased attention, and with it, new challenges. The press began to take notice of the hotel's ability to manage difficult situations and to foster an environment of inclusivity. While the publicity was mostly positive, it also brought with it a number of critics who saw the hotel's open approach as a vulnerability to exploit. One morning, as Jonathan prepared for another busy day, he was handed a thick envelope that had arrived via overnight mail. The return address was from a local columnist known for stirring up controversy. Jonathan opened it to find an article draft titled, "View the Perils of Political Correctness," a critique of the hotel industry's new wave. The piece highlighted the very things Jonathan had worked so hard to establish, the emphasis on inclusivity and respect. However, the columnist took a far different view, arguing that such practices stifled free speech and disrupted the natural order of hospitality. Jonathan was no stranger to criticism, but this felt different. The article wasn't just a critique of his business. It was an attack on the very principles that had guided him through the challenging months. He reread the piece, trying to discern the deeper message. The journalist had painted a picture of the hotel as an institution that placed politics above the comfort of guests, accusing them of imposing liberal ideologies under the guise of customer service. Jonathan wasn't the type to back down from a challenge, but this was a particularly tricky situation. He understood that the press could either help or hinder the hotel's progress, and this article had the potential to tarnish their reputation. He spent hours considering how to respond. Should he write a rebuttal, ignore it, and let it pass? In the end, he realized that silence wasn't the answer. The hotel had grown through dialogue and open communication, and this was just another opportunity to do the same. He decided to reach out directly to the columnist. He knew from experience that most critics never expected to be engaged in a real conversation. This was his chance to change that. Jonathan arranged a meeting with the columnist, hoping that a face-to-face discussion would give him the opportunity to convey his message in a more meaningful way than an impersonal email or public statement. The columnist, a man named Brian Whitaker, was known for his sharp words and his no-nonsense attitude toward the media. Jonathan wasn't sure what to expect, but he knew it had to be done. The meeting took place at a local coffee shop, a neutral ground where both men could speak openly. When Brian walked in, Jonathan stood up to shake his hand, but Brian simply nodded and sat down without saying much. Jonathan, trying to keep the conversation respectful, opened the discussion. "I saw your article, Brian, and I wanted to meet with you in person because I think there's a misunderstanding about what we're trying to do at the hotel." Brian didn't mince words. "I'm not interested in your PR spin, Jonathan. The reality is that the world's becoming too soft, and your hotel is just a symptom of that. You're more concerned about appeasing every guest than providing real service." Jonathan held his ground, determined to make his case. "We're not trying to please everyone, Brian, but we do believe in creating a space where people can engage with each other respectfully, no matter their views. We value inclusivity because that's what allows us to create a more meaningful environment for both our guests and our staff." Brian scoffed. "Meaningful? You're running a business, not a social experiment. You can't expect to please everyone with your values while serving people who just want a hotel room and a good night's sleep. People don't want their political views challenged when they're on vacation." Jonathan paused, choosing his words carefully. "I think you're underestimating people, Brian. Most of our guests are here for an experience. They want to feel safe, valued, and heard. And whether they agree with our values or not, they understand that our approach doesn't undermine their freedom to believe what they choose." Brian was silent for a moment, clearly considering Jonathan's point. It was rare that anyone stood up to him in such a direct way, and Jonathan's calm demeanor had caught him off guard. "I don't agree with everything you've said," Brian eventually admitted, "but I respect the fact that you've stuck to your principles. Maybe I've been too quick to judge." He paused again, then added, "I'll think about what you've said." The meeting ended with a sense of mutual respect. Brian left with a promise to write a more balanced article, one that explored the nuances of Jonathan's approach rather than simply labeling it as a trend. Jonathan didn't know if that would happen, but he felt good about having had the conversation. As the weeks went by, the article never came, but a new piece appeared in the local paper. This one was a more thoughtful exploration of the hotel's policies, with a deeper understanding of the values behind the choices Jonathan had made. It wasn't a glowing endorsement, but it was fair and respectful. For Jonathan, that was enough. The hotel had weathered yet another storm, but this time, it had done so with dignity and authenticity. Jonathan knew that challenges would continue to arise, but as long as he stayed true to his vision, he was confident they could face anything together. As the hotel's reputation continued to grow, Jonathan realized that he had become more than just a local businessman. He was now seen as a thought leader in his industry. His commitment to inclusivity, respect for diversity, and commitment to fostering community had begun to attract attention from larger hospitality organizations. Some of these organizations reached out to him for advice, others invited him to speak at conferences, and a few even tried to partner with him on new ventures. Despite the growing attention, Jonathan remained focused on the day-to-day operations of the hotel. He understood that the business was still fragile, and he didn't want to become complacent. Each new partnership, every accolade, and every invitation to speak in front of industry leaders were great, but they were not the true measure of success. The real success, Jonathan believed, was in how the hotel operated on the ground level, how it treated every guest, and how the employees continued to reflect the hotel's values. One day, Jonathan received an email from a prominent CEO of a multinational hotel chain, offering him the opportunity to collaborate on a nationwide campaign. The email was formal and complimentary, praising Jonathan for his innovative approach to hospitality. The offer was generous, but Jonathan hesitated. While the deal would bring significant financial rewards and prestige, he didn't want to risk losing the identity and culture of the hotel that had made it so successful. He spent the next few days weighing the pros and cons, discussing it with his team, and reflecting on his core values. Ultimately, Jonathan decided that the partnership wasn't the right move for him. He valued the autonomy of his business too much. He had worked too hard to build a space where people could freely express themselves and engage in open dialogue, and he wasn't willing to compromise that for short-term gains. It was a tough decision, but Jonathan had learned over the years that he couldn't always chase the biggest opportunities. Sometimes, sticking to what you believe in meant turning down the bigger offers to stay true to your vision. Months had passed since the incident with the Maga hat. The hotel was thriving, and Jonathan was pleased with how things had evolved. But the events had made him reflect on something deeper. His journey, the evolution of his values, and the way he had navigated through adversity. He had come a long way from the young man who had first opened the hotel, eager to make a name for himself and succeed. At that time, he had seen the hotel primarily as a business, a way to build wealth and security for himself. But over time, as he confronted different challenges, Jonathan began to see the hotel as a tool for something more meaningful. The hotel had become a platform for change, a space where people could explore their differences and come together. It was a space that wasn't just about luxury or comfort, but about creating an environment where ideas could collide, people could grow, and communities could be built. And Jonathan's own personal growth mirrored the hotel's evolution. He had learned to embrace a broader perspective, to listen before reacting, and to create space for both agreement and disagreement. As he sat in his office, gazing out the window at the busy street below, Jonathan felt a sense of peace. The road ahead was still uncertain, but he was no longer afraid of what lay beyond the horizon. The hotel was more than just a building. It was a reflection of his journey, a testament to the power of perseverance, inclusivity, and the ability to change. From the perspective of the hotel guests, the changes Jonathan had made were subtle but impactful. The atmosphere of the hotel had become one of quiet confidence, where the staff was attentive but never overbearing, and guests could experience the luxury of the space without the pressure of conforming to any particular ideology. It was a place where people felt seen and heard, where their differences were respected, and where they could be themselves. One guest, a businessman from overseas, commented on the openness of the hotel during his stay. "I've stayed in many hotels around the world," he said while sipping his morning coffee in the hotel lounge, "but I've never stayed anywhere quite like this. There's something different here, not just in the design or the amenities, but in the way people treat each other. It's like there's a genuine respect for individuality." Others shared similar sentiments, praising the way the hotel fostered a sense of belonging without judgment. There was a quiet respect in the air, a feeling that guests could engage in discussions, express their views, and be heard without fear of backlash. As the hotel continued to grow, it was clear that the success Jonathan had experienced was due in large part to the authenticity of the experience it offered. The business was not driven by trends or marketing strategies, but by a core set of values that resonated with people on a deeper level. However, even as things appeared to be stabilizing, Jonathan knew that the final test of the hotel's success was yet to come. In the competitive world of hospitality, staying relevant meant continually evolving, learning from past experiences, and pushing the boundaries of what was possible. It wasn't long before Jonathan faced yet another challenge that would test the very essence of what he had worked so hard to build. A new competitor opened a hotel just across the street, offering similar services at a lower price point. While this was not an unusual occurrence in the industry, Jonathan knew this new competitor would be different. Their approach was more aggressive and corporate, focused purely on profits rather than the values that had driven Jonathan's hotel. As the two hotels battled for guests, Jonathan found himself at a crossroads. Should he cut prices to remain competitive? Should he compromise on his values to match his competitor's model? Once again, Jonathan found himself returning to the question he had asked himself so many times before. What was more important, staying true to the hotel's core values or winning at any cost? The answer, he realized, was clear. He wasn't in this business to win in the traditional sense. He was in it to create a space where people could connect, learn, and grow. He would not compromise the hotel's identity for the sake of competition. Instead, he would continue to offer an experience that was rooted in respect, openness, and inclusivity. Jonathan knew that his guests appreciated the experience his hotel provided, and that would continue to be the driving force behind its success. As Jonathan continued to navigate the challenges of running a hotel, he found himself increasingly drawn to a new type of conflict, one that was both personal and professional. While his reputation in the hospitality industry was flourishing, and the hotel remained a beacon of inclusivity, he was beginning to feel the weight of a new pressure. The challenge of balancing his vision with the outside world's expectations. The rise of social media influencers and their growing influence over public opinion brought with it a new set of challenges. The hotel's guests had started to include high-profile individuals, social media stars, and celebrities who were looking for a unique place to stay, one that aligned with their personal brands. While this had initially seemed like an opportunity, Jonathan soon realized that the arrival of these figures brought with it an underlying pressure to conform to their standards and demands. One particular influencer, a well-known political figure, had recently booked a stay at the hotel. She was outspoken about her conservative views, and, much like the Maga hat incident that had ignited controversy months earlier, her presence posed a challenge to the hotel's inclusive atmosphere. Jonathan found himself caught in the middle as some guests expressed discomfort with her political stance, while others defended her right to stay. It was a delicate situation. Jonathan knew that the values of his hotel, which emphasized respect, understanding, and the right to express oneself, had to be upheld, but he also understood the risk of alienating guests or creating a hostile environment. As the influencer's stay progressed, Jonathan kept a close eye on the situation. Her followers began to share posts about their stay at the hotel, some celebrating it as a victory for conservative values, while others criticized the hotel for hosting her at all. The feedback was mixed, and Jonathan couldn't help but feel a twinge of anxiety. He had worked so hard to create an environment that was welcoming to everyone, regardless of their political beliefs, but this new challenge seemed like a test of his principles. He spent several sleepless nights thinking about the matter, weighing his options. On the one hand, he didn't want to engage in politics, as he had always tried to steer clear of aligning his business with any specific ideology. On the other hand, he knew that standing firm in his values meant accommodating all guests, even those whose views might clash with his own. The situation escalated when the influencer posted a controversial tweet about the hotel's policies, claiming that the staff had treated her unfairly. The tweet quickly went viral, with thousands of people weighing in on the alleged incident. The tweet was followed by a series of others that painted the hotel in a negative light, accusing it of being anti-conservative and unwelcoming to people with differing political views. Jonathan was horrified. He couldn't believe what was unfolding. The hotel that had once been a place of peace and mutual respect was now being dragged into a political storm. The social media firestorm intensified, with detractors accusing Jonathan of being hypocritical, of not walking the talk when it came to inclusivity. To make matters worse, some of the hotel's longtime patrons, who had previously praised the atmosphere of the hotel, began to send angry messages, stating that they no longer felt comfortable staying in such a politically charged environment. The hotel's online reviews plummeted, and Jonathan knew that the pressure was mounting. He called an emergency meeting with his staff to address the crisis. "We've built something special here," he began, his voice steady but tinged with concern. "But we're being tested right now. We're being asked to choose sides, but we can't do that. Our commitment to inclusivity doesn't mean we have to agree with everyone. It just means we provide a space where people can feel respected no matter their views." The staff nodded in agreement, their loyalty to Jonathan clear. Together, they devised a plan to handle the situation. One that included open communication, transparency with guests, and a renewed focus on the core principles that had made the hotel so successful in the first place. The crisis came to a head when the influencer demanded a public apology from the hotel, accusing the staff of bias and discrimination. Jonathan knew that issuing a public apology without addressing the core issue would send the wrong message. Instead, he invited her for a private meeting at the hotel, hoping that a face-to-face conversation could clear the air. The meeting was tense. The influencer, surrounded by her team, was vocal about her grievances. She accused Jonathan of using the hotel as a platform for his political views, claiming that he was part of a liberal agenda that silenced conservative voices. Jonathan listened carefully. He didn't interrupt, even though his emotions were running high. He understood the need to remain calm and collected. After she finished speaking, Jonathan addressed her concerns in a measured tone. "I want to make one thing clear," he began. The hotel is not about politics. It's about creating a space where people can come together and have open, respectful conversations. It's about welcoming all guests, regardless of their beliefs, and ensuring that everyone feels safe and valued. If something about your stay made you feel otherwise, I sincerely apologize, but I assure you that was never our intention. There was a long silence. Finally, the influencer softened. She nodded and acknowledged Jonathan's point. I may not agree with your views, she said, but I understand where you're coming from, and I respect your right to run your business as you see fit. The situation wasn't completely resolved, but the meeting had provided a sense of closure. The influencer agreed to take down her controversial posts and refrain from making further accusations. While not all of her followers were satisfied, the crisis began to die down, and the hotel slowly regained its footing. In the aftermath of the crisis, Jonathan took stock of the lessons he had learned. The experience had reinforced his belief in the hotel's core mission: to create a space where people from all walks of life could come together, express their views, and engage in meaningful conversations. The hotel's reputation had been challenged, but it had also been tested and strengthened. Jonathan knew that the world was changing, and the pressures on businesses would only increase. But he was resolute. He would continue to operate the hotel according to his values, not because it was easy, but because it was right. The hotel's success wasn't defined by its popularity or its ability to cater to the masses. It was defined by its commitment to respect, understanding, and inclusivity, principles that would guide the hotel through whatever challenges the future might bring.